so much for joining us. So this is a really cool, unique space. This is both a space for professionals and for the broader public. We are the home for AIA Seattle, which is a professional association for architects, the AIA Washington Council, which is our state level branch, Design in Public, which is focused on public programming, like the Seattle Design Festival that happens every year, and the Seattle Architecture Foundation, which is an organization that focuses on public education around architectural history and those sorts of things. As I said, my name is Connor Dash, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the membership and volunteer manager here at AIA Seattle. If you've been involved in any of our committees with AIA Seattle, that's when you've most likely encountered me. Our committees are the sort of lifeblood of our organization. We have about 20 groups that are based on affinity or professional practice and work on everything from homelessness and urban design to environmental issues, healthcare design, women or diversity in the profession, youth in the profession, on all sorts of issues that they're passionate about, and host programs here at the center and throughout the region throughout the year. A couple things that we have coming up that I wanted to make sure you all knew about. If anyone is an associate looking to become licensed soon, our Young Architects Forum is hosting its next ARE prep workshop on the 23rd, so tomorrow, over at DLR Groups. We'll be focused on code. Also related to code, on February 20th, we have a half-day code seminar based on the 2018 updates to the International Fire Code. That's going to be at City Hall in the Bertha Knight Landis room. The project management series, something we just launched for anyone who is part of a smaller firm, and that's going to be running from February to June. Several sessions. You can find the details on our website. And then our medical design forum is going to be at Mount Baker Community Club February 6th and 7th. A couple more pieces of housekeeping. I should have said this at the outset, but I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the various Coast Salish peoples, but in this neighborhood specifically, the Duwamish. This is unceded territory, and it's important for us as an organization that's focused on land stewardship, in particular to acknowledge this history and present in the land that we are occupying here. And then additionally, if you need to help yourself to any drinks, we have alcoholic and non-alcoholic in the back, as well as some fruit and snacks. If you need to use the Wi-Fi, we have the network and password right here, and our restrooms right here. I was able to unlock the door right here. You'll just need to use these codes for the respective men's and women's, use whichever restroom in which you feel the most comfortable. If you need anything else, feel free to come grab me. I'll be roaming around tonight. With that, I will pass it off to Indian Homelessness to talk with us. First, our design forum.
Yeah. Let's say a few words really quick here, and we'll get rolling. So my name is Dylan Wasecki, one of the co-chairs of the AIA Urban Design Forum. Thank you all for being here. And just a couple quick thoughts on kind of what initiated this event. So all the citizens of Seattle, as a general rule, want to have a desire to assist those without homes to get into housing, permanent housing. And if that's the case, which I believe it to be, we also have to accept the physical form that transitional housing takes in order to incrementally move those without homes into permanent shelter as an end goal. Society should not have individuals that are permanently homeless, but society will likely always have transitional housing in some form. What is acceptable transitional housing? Citizen perception versus functional requirements are two very different things. Tent encampments, tiny house villages, overnight shelters. There's a difference between what seems to work and what we need citizens of Seattle seem to accept. So questions that kind of spurred this talk are, what role does the creation of community play along the way as we're trying to get folks without homes into housing? Are there certain transitional housing types that work better than others to create these informal communities that provide support? What barriers exists to creating and maintaining informal community. So with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Becca, and then our panel as well. There we go, just make this up there. So we have James Mayton, if you just want to kind of throw a hand up, so you guys aren't necessarily sitting in the order. James Mayton with SHA, Bruce COHO, and Scott Morrow with Nicholsville. David Judge with Traction, Terra, Walter Washington, Wellspring, Family Services, and Anitra Freeman, who's with Share and Wheel. So I'll let Becca take it from here. And then one quick note in terms of, if you guys have any questions, we got some stickies over there. Adam's going to pass those around. Write down the sticky. We're going to do about 45 minutes of moderator questions, and we'll do a half hour at the end for questions the audience has. All right, thank you.
Hello. Building on the intro, we found that the solution of allowing those experiencing homelessness to develop housing opportunities for themselves has been absent from the proposed solutions by our city government in addressing the homelessness crisis. Whether you call them encampments, tent cities, or tiny house villages, these informal housing options currently provide shelter for an estimated 13% of people experiencing homelessness. In Western societies, the U.S. has a long and proud tradition of self-built or incremental housing across the strata of society. A substantial portion of this housing was subsidized and blessed by local, state, and federal governments, from frontier homesteads carved out of former Native American lands to small post-World War II suburban cottages funded by government-backed mortgages that were expanded and enhanced over time. There are also examples of self-built housing with no government endorsement, such as Hoover Towns. These communities are often disregarded as a viable housing solution as they lack the centralized infrastructure, which many of us take for granted, or because neighbors reject their slapshot appearance. However, Seattle's homeless housing market and democratic institutions have repeatedly failed to provide sufficient shelter for its citizens, making informal communities the de facto solution to the housing crisis for thousands of individuals, while thousands of others are extremely burdened by the cost of providing for a roof over their head and may fall into this condition at any point. Tonight, we'd like to discuss how design can help those without traditional houses and reassess the role that informal communities can play in transitioning its members into permanent housing to help create a more stable and equitable housing condition in Seattle for the coming decades. So the first question I have for our panel, and I believe there's a microphone over there. However, if you have a hard time grabbing that, I can come and bring you one as well. So what is the path of moving people from the margins of society to having a full, secure place in society through housing? And how related do you feel that this place in society and housing status are? Anyone want to respond?
Test?
Yeah.
Did you want us to do a short personal intro? Just kind of a little bit of
Yeah.
background.
Yeah, I'm missing that part of telling the people what our organizations are.
Okay.
Want to start, David? And
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead. So my name's David Judge. I'm an architect here in Seattle. I'd say my passion lies in public interest design, which has led me to a lot of different interesting experiences. I lived in Peru for 2 years in the Peace Corps, and that kind of led me to working with the Informal Urban Communities Initiative, now Traction Design. So working with informal communities and having participatory design is a really important part of the design process for giving a voice to those who are typically marginalized. And here in Seattle, I've kind of shifted my focus more to working with the Committee on Homelessness, here with Anton, Erica, Emily, a few others in the crowd. And most recently, we've kind of helped flip a bus to be a justice bus, a little mobile unit for people experiencing homelessness, getting legal services, and getting back on social benefits. So trying to give a little perspective, a little bit of my background and what I can bring to the conversation. So look forward to it.
Scott next.
So my name's Scott. I'm from Informal, and what I used to do was work with renters, tenants, and in the downtown area, I worked with tenants in 35 buildings that have since been torn down. There are about 30,000 people used to live inside that their places disappeared. So then I started working with homeless people, and I've been doing that for the past 30 years or so, both with Share and with Nicholsville, and tried to support Freeman and Wheel along the way. And the people I run into mostly want to get, who are homeless, mostly want some shelter, so that's what I spend most of the time.
Hi, my name is James Mithun, and I work with the Seattle Housing Authority. I work in asset management and housing finance, so I deal with all sorts of numbers related to more conventional affordable housing units that have been funded through predominantly federal housing subsidy. Beyond that, I have experience growing up in generational poverty that definitely informs my take on the answers to a lot of these topics, as well as some experiences as a Peace Corps volunteer as well, only in Albania, which also has some informal urban communities, especially closer to the capital where more of the economic opportunity is.
Hello, my name is Bruce Goebel. I'm a resident at Nicholsville Tiny House Village, and I have the painstaking job of getting the city council to listen to homeless people about what their needs are.
Well, my name is Anitra Freeman. I am here from Share and Wheel, which are grassroots, non-hierarchical, democratic organizations, and I guess that means we're informal. We actually have have evolved a support structure and rules and processes, which I might talk about later, but we are definitely, I've worked with several organizations that listen to homeless people and involve homeless people in the addressing the problems of homelessness. And Share and Wheel are unique because they're homeless-led. Homeless people decide what the problems are. Homeless people decide what to do about it. And a very bare-bones staff that all get minimum wage provide technical support for that. I became involved with Share and Wheel when I was homeless in 1995. I stayed involved since I got into housing in 96 because this is my community. And that is a big part of why Share and Wheel is so important, why the informal communities are important for ending homelessness. They are a community.
Thank you, and thank you for your interest in the conversation. I love to talk about this stuff, and it's so important. And of course, where you're located at, or where we're sitting at, is surrounded by folks who are experiencing instability. My name is Walter Washington. I'm from Seattle, Washington, so I'm a Seattleite. I'm not sure if anyone else is from the Seattle area. Or if you've been here longer than 10 years, you've seen a drastic change in the area, certainly, right? And it's an issue for me that it's the local issue of my lifetime. And it's one of 2 or 3 issues that keep me up at night, trying to think about innovative solutions to end this cycle of family homelessness. The other 2, my 7-year-old son, who has a very screeching loud voice and talks a lot at night. And then, not to get too political, but an orange person with yellow hair, who hopefully would be moving on in November. But I've worked across the sector. I worked with foster care youth at Treehouse. I worked with homeless youth through youth care. And then at Compass House Alliance right down the street, I was emergency services director for 10 programs, 6 shelters. My last project for Compass House Alliance was the first 24-hour shelter in the county. Compass First Presbyterian Church that has 100 individuals who can stay there 24 hours a day. So that was kind of the model that was going to pace the shelter work going forward. And then now with Wellspring Family Services, I work with the entire family. So certainly one of my missions was to bring folks together across sectors, across counties, right? And look at it as really a regional issue, and to bring folks who might not see themselves as part of the conversation into the conversation. Whether you're in architecture, whether you're in IT professional, or whoever might be a small business owner, you're all seeing it and we're all thinking about it. So thank you for that.
Thank you all. Okay, I guess we'll go back to that first question. And Anitra, I think you outlined the relationship between your community and the type of housing you have very eloquently. I was wondering if you'd like to expand a little bit more around how housing determines your place in society.
Okay. Well, one of, to jump ahead to one of the questions you have coming up is, how is housing status and place in society related? And they are related now. When I became homeless, I felt like an alien on the planet. Like the worst part of being homeless was being isolated and invisible. If we're going to end homelessness, we have to end that. People have to be not isolated, and people have to be treating each other as human beings who are important because you're there. Homelessness does offer an opportunity for people to develop a self-identity that doesn't depend on your material possessions. And not everybody gets there. When you do, you realize that you have to stop judging housed people on their material possessions too. And, start treating people as human beings. So that, that is the basic part of a sense of belonging. It's the idea that you are seen for yourself, accepted for yourself. You have a place that you can be yourself, and a place where what you have to contribute to the community is valued, where you are needed. Those things are more important to people than the physical surroundings. I talk to people who one of the reasons they would rather live in a tent, even in the middle of winter, is because they are surrounded by people they know. They feel safe because there's 24/7 security, people watching out for each other. And what they have to contribute is valued. That is more important than having a big bed in a 3-bedroom house. The people who say that tent cities are undignified, your dignity does not depend on the physical quality of your surroundings. Your dignity depends on how you are treated and how you are valued. That is, and once we have that, we had a community in which every single one of us was valued and treated with respect, we wouldn't have homelessness. So that to me is the basic part of anything. And also housing.
David, did you want to elaborate on some of the perspective you've gotten from your work in informal communities?
Sure. So I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who's never experienced homelessness. So I'd like to let others kind of expand more. But from my perspective of working with communities of people who are experiencing homelessness, and before Seattle allowed the 1-year permit, say, to move every 3 months, having to uproot your community and relocate is a huge effort, and it creates a lot of anxiety to people that are dealing with a lot of other issues. And so I think, the question of place in society and housing status, I'd definitely like to just reflect on what you just said, and communities formed through the people around you, not so much the house over your head. So I think, you know, the bonds that are formed through that relocation and reforming of community over and over again is really strong. And, you know, the city's prerogative of moving people into transitional and permanent housing kind of disrupts that community that was once formed. So I definitely understand the kind of being torn in two directions of wanting to have you know, stable and permanent shelter, but also not wanting to lose those social networks and connections that you formed while finding your way towards that shelter. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind throughout the conversation is, you know, if you're transitioning to a new place, how do you still retain that those networks that you formed along the way?
James was wondering if you would have anything to say about how you maintain community when you are faced with sort of the economic reality of transitioning people into from temporary housing into more permanent housing due to the financial realities of.
I wouldn't say that I'm super well equipped to comment on that specifically, but I can talk a little bit about how American housing policy has been engineered to support moving people through different types of housing, including the affordable housing that Seattle Housing Authority owns and manages. This slide right here is a mental model that was developed by a policy and strategic initiatives work group at the Housing Authority. I think that there are quite a few disclaimers summarized in that top left box. It's not intended to be generalizable to all people that have any need for affordable housing. It also suggests with that stepping the staircase kind of diagram that there is a logical order to different categories of housing that people can afford at different socioeconomic levels. SHA doesn't necessarily believe that that is the case for all people. We know that about 1/3 of our residents will never be economically self-sufficient due to a variety of reasons. Many of them are seniors on fixed incomes that aren't going to be working again in their lives and therefore have limited income potential, but nonetheless are a part of our community and need affordable housing. There are also plenty of people that are not what we categorize as work-able adults for a variety of different reasons. And depending on where they're at in life, there could be a variety of reasons why someone who might be categorized as work-able experiences difficulty finding employment in our economy. All of those caveats aside, what this diagram attempts to do is break up and illustrate how different categories of housing are serving different categories of socioeconomic status within our region. And for illustration purposes, a lot of the affordable housing that SHA manages that's funded through federal affordable housing policies and subsidy, that's typically serving people who are between 0 to 40% of AMI. With tax credit housing, we have a lot in the 40 to 50% of AMI range. And more often than not, folks that do not get into housing that SHA manages, who might be in a 20 to 60% of AMI range, experience all types of economic and other hardships that might cause them to slip into some of those lower tiers of socioeconomic stability. So, in a sense, I'm trying to summarize that this is a way that we understand how federal housing policy structures what we're supposed to provide. My own life experience tells me that plenty of people that aren't necessarily in affordable housing don't want to be in affordable housing, but could benefit from solutions outside of what SHA manages. I think that when we think about community, we think a lot in terms of physical places, but they're all types of communities, and to other panelists' points, it doesn't necessarily require that people be assembled in a particular format. I think even AIA can be considered a community of sorts, so it's important to think that there's a whole lot of diversity to consider when addressing any of these questions.
I'd like to build on the idea that you were saying that sort of the housing as described in our building codes can't fit the needs of our diverse population. And I was wondering if I could ask the panel, is our preconception of permanent housing limiting our ability to provide successful means to adequate housing for those without homes? And if you could sort of allow more diversity in the types of housing that we're allowed, is there some specific type of code or law and how the city regulates housing that you'd change to increase the availability of shelter for people in Seattle?
Yes.
Could I say something about this one?
Yeah.
They all need to say
I
about
don't know if Russia wants to go.
No,
first, but I wanted to say something. Can you hear me or should I have that thing? You can?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I don't think that the building codes are very important. You
Yep.
know, they're downtown, SROs, y'all know what that is, right? I mean, this is deep, you guys are architects. SROs, they didn't go away because of the building codes. They went away because it economically made more money to build the crap that's new down here now. And that means 30,000 people less down here. It's not the building codes that forced all those people out on the street. I think it's way overemphasized how important building codes are in relationship to the amount of affordable housing. So that's just not my experience in Seattle. The building codes didn't do it. It was economics that did it, pure and simple. And setting aside building codes, it's my opinion that, if anything, there should be more regulation of housing and of development. I think it's a disaster when back in the 80s, they took out of SEPA the requirement that how it would affect low-income people, how it would affect human beings, went out of the environmental protection regulations for evaluating new projects. I think that's a disaster. I think there should be more consideration of and more regulation of housing, not less, and it should be guided by justice and looking out for poor people.
Anitra?
Yeah. Okay, I agree entirely with what Scott said. On the other hand, because it is economically rewarding to build, high-cost, high-rise rather than low-cost high-rises. Therefore, it behooves the people who want to build high-cost high-rises to persuade everybody that that is the way you want your city to look. That's the way you want to live. That's the way you want your city to look, and that influences the building codes and the building policies, etc. When we were starting Tent City 3 in 2000, I just came up over and over again with the impression that the image of Seattle in the heads of most of our political leaders was miles and miles of single-family dwellings with yards. And that is the way they wanted the city to look, and they didn't want a bunch of little tiny houses, and they definitely did not want tents anywhere in sight. The idea that we want everybody to have their own 3-bedroom single-family house with a yard around it is an obstacle to building enough housing for everybody.
Walter, you would?
Yeah, I want to be mindful that there is a tremendous diversity of folks who are experiencing homelessness, right? And I want to see more condos that can be owned, right? I think for some percentage of those experiencing homelessness, we want homeownership. That's the right ambition. That those who, we talked about this in a pre-call, that for some percentage of individuals, they should be homeowners or own something that can be handed off to their successors, right? Or if they have a friend who's experiencing instability, they can help them stay with them. Something they own, right? And increasingly, that's more difficult to think about in the city because there's so little land that's available. But so if you think about it as a regional solution, we need to have spaces that families, we don't get talked about very often. We talk about homelessness and the cycle of homelessness, right? There is a predictor, right, of those who are experiencing homelessness as children, and the likelihood, 3 times likelihood, experiencing homelessness as adults, that if we don't do things that are innovative and the right ambition, that they can inherit something to call their own, then we're going to be very, very limited. So just want to be mindful that it's okay to be ambitious and think about homeownership, knowing that there are some challenges to that.
Add to that. So, as a newly licensed architect, I had to learn a lot about building codes and kind of how they developed, why they're there. And I definitely, working in informal settlements in Peru, where homeowners aren't going to the city to have their plans checked. There is a spectrum of types of housing that allow communities to happen. And so I think, I kind of prepped for this talk by watching a TED Talk by Esther Sullivan, who talks about, mobile homes in the United States and how 1 in 5 new single-family home owners are in mobile home parks, and how it's the most easy way to get home ownership, but the most tenuous because the land that the homes are on is not owned by the people, and zoning has a lot to do with that. So zoning codes, allow for mobile home parks to be built in commercial and industrial areas. Folks can afford a pre-manufactured home, but once areas start to develop and gentrification starts to happen, they're the first people that lose everything that they've sunk into their equity of a mobile home that's no longer mobile. So I think, the city allowing prefab houses in closer to residential areas where people won't be swept off of their property, and looking at different ways of home ownership, talking about the co-op or condo model of collectively owning the land, where many families can come together and kind of look at development as one whole community. I think there's some innovative solutions that could happen with changing zoning or building codes. I think in working in a small community in Peru, informal settlements work well because it allows families to grow incrementally as means come in, and they can slowly add on to their homes one level at a time. And while when done poorly, it's really dangerous in unstable conditions, earthquakes. There's reasons for codes, but I think something we could learn from informal communities abroad is incremental equity, and kind of translate that into how we operate here in the U.S.
Both Walter and David shared sort of a vision of what sort of a more diverse look on affordable housing could look like. I was wondering if any of our other panelists wanted to share with us an idea of what accessible shelter could look like in Seattle in, say, 2100.
Accessible shelter?
Yeah, however you want to define it, housing, tent encampments, what can we do to make sure everyone has a community and move further ahead?
Well, from my experience being homeless, what we're experiencing right now at our village is an immense support from our neighborhood. And that's really important. That's something that you've got to understand is 4 years ago when our village was put in place, there was fear and uncertainty of the unknown. You know, the typical crime rate's gonna increase, drug use is gonna increase, all these bad things are gonna happen. And guess what? 4 years later, it didn't. And just to show you the kind of support, we've gotten over 500 signatures from our local neighborhood supporting our tiny house village. And that's unheard of. And so that's really what I see in 2100 is that throughout Seattle, throughout every neighborhood, there'll be a smaller type tiny house village. You know, nothing large, not 100 people, but maybe 25 to 30 residents. And if each neighborhood could have one of these type villages, you know, we'll have all these separate communities that are supporting each other. Our neighbors don't look at us as homeless. They look at us as their neighbors. And right now we're facing having to move from our neighborhood, and they're upset about it. They're sad about it. They don't want to see us go. You know, we contribute to the neighborhood. We do a litter buster program where all our residents go out and pick up trash off the streets. So we keep our neighborhoods clean. You know, we help with any beautification projects that might come up in the local neighborhood from, you know, parks or anything like that. So we make sure we're very active in the community, and it's that community support that is going to make all tiny house villages successful. So that's what I see happening in 2100.
Yeah, I mean, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm hoping that by 2100 we have realized that we have to change the whole economic social system so we aren't creating homelessness anymore. You know, when people ask me, can we really end homelessness? There's so much of it. So of course we can. We created it, so we can end it. And you know, but part of ending it is creating a pool of housing that's not a market commodity, that's social housing, socially owned. And part of it is that we don't, you know, that we do value people more than just economically. But you know, if we make some real changes to the corporate capitalist system, we can end this kind of mass homelessness. If we have this level of federal funding for housing, like we did back in the 70s, instead of this level, which we zero, which we have now, then we will have that level of homelessness instead of this level, which we have now. But there will always be some people who are in transition, you know, who you know, had some big loss or accident that's incapacitated them for a while, or who got burned out, or for whatever reason are temporarily homeless. And we will always have a small number of people who, for whatever reason, you know, are hobos. But we won't have the epidemic. And if we have the attitude, the community support of the people who are temporarily homeless, that, you know, if everybody had guaranteed housing, my mother probably would have still been manic depressive. My father would have still had PTSD from Korea. I would have still had bipolar disorder. You know, we would have still had problems, but we would have always been in the same place. And I'm seeing the same doctor consistently over a period of time, so I would have been diagnosed by 8 years old. And my whole life would be entirely changed. So that's what I see in 2100. People are not forced to move every 3 months. People are not isolated when they become homeless and out of work. And people who do have problems get them dealt with a lot quicker.
The year 2100,
Mm-hmm.
that's a long time.
Yeah.
And I just
Next
turned
year.
I just turned 40. And I'm thinking about what we can do in our lifetime, but I would like us to start thinking about instability, right? There's so many families and single adults who are experiencing homelessness that if we were intervened sometimes just 5-6 months prior and cared about them then, would have saved the entire system thousands of dollars and also families and individuals would have not experienced extended trauma that comes with losing their communities and their networks. Right? So I think really by that time, hopefully within the next year or so, we change the conversation in our region to talk about those who are on the verge as well. Right? And that when we all hear folks, as we do in our common lives, and folks who are experiencing traumatic experiences, those who need help, we don't wait till they're on the streets to serve them, but to connect them. And then we also have a system that when folks need help, they can call and get help right away. As opposed to, you gotta go through a very complicated system, and they tell you that you're not vulnerable enough, or you don't deserve help yet, or that you don't meet a certain criteria. That whatever it is that you're particularly nuanced in your family structure, you can get help right away. Whether you're living in a car or a shelter, or with a friend, it doesn't matter, because we're talking about instability. So that's what I'd like us to move towards by 2100.
James, would you like to add as well?
Yeah, I had a comment. I think stability is also one of the key pieces for me. I think in many cases communities do thrive when there is increased stability, and I think very few people in the Seattle community would disagree with the sentiment that more stability is good regardless of the physical form that any particular neighborhood or community takes. One thing that I would predict will become more common or likely in 2100 if we aren't able to address housing challenges in other ways is starting to recognize that the traditional concept of the American dream, the single family home with a yard, that doesn't necessarily work, or it's not affordable for society to provide to a global population of 8-12 billion, whatever we're working with at that time. And when we look inside our own community, if we are compromising, if that's your belief that it's a compromise, certainly federal housing policies believe that anything less than a discrete housing unit with a 35-year depreciable lifespan, that is a compromise. Eventually, I think that gets relaxed, and because increasingly we see people living in the recreational vehicles of decades past, perhaps some way to give households or individuals a way to build equity is to give them ownership of space as opposed to ownership of structures. And if we do move in that direction, start to take certain areas and grant ownership of that space or rights to the use of that space, be it a parking space or a very small parcel within a tiny home village, then there is value to that space that can be owned and can appreciate over time as that area becomes more desirable to all the different people in our society that will be increasingly attracted and comfortable living in those types of accommodations. Yeah.
So right now in 2020, the U.S. population is about 330 million people. 100 years ago, it was around 106. So looking at 2100, that's 560 million. That's quite a we're growing really quickly, and looking at the climate crisis and what's happening across the U.S. and communities just being ravaged by fires and floods, and looking at the future, it's a sad truth that there will be environmental refugees, people that large communities, who don't have stable homeownership. And I think part of the premise of the question was, Seattle isn't a good place environmentally, that it could be a climate refuge. And so I think this idea of mobile homeownership or mobile equity is going to be very important in the future when you have entire communities that lose their equity. And it's hard to look, like you said, that far in the future, and there's so much that we can do in the short term. I think building codes and zoning change over time, and they change due to social pressure. I was prepping for this. I was at the Starbucks roastery, and I don't know if anyone's been in the bathrooms there, but it's one bathroom for anyone. There's one set of sinks. That's social progress, looking at what gender norms are and who can share space. The 5/2 development we're seeing everywhere wasn't legal in 1990. It's progressive communities that push for advancements in building technology or push for advancements in building code. Cross-laminated timber has been huge over in Europe, and it's coming to the US, which allows you to build faster and cheaper. So all this being said, there needs to be pressure on politicians, pressure on city council to make progress in what's allowed. I definitely think we have all the tools right now to make a big impact. We just need to apply the right pressure.
Thank you. I think Bruce's story really eloquently illustrated what good we can achieve when neighborhoods start to look past all the negative stereotypes of homeless people and provide services to them as opposed to pushing them away. I was wondering if any of you had other suggestions for how city agencies can work with neighborhoods and provide services to help people overcome those negative stereotypes and assist with things like waste removal and the basic services needed to function as a community.
Yes, I actually have talked to somebody who, in their neighborhood, there was a pop-up encampment, informal little encampment, and the neighbors were helping them. Like, would bring over trash bags and take trash away. The neighbors would run a truck to the dump. And so the place was neat and clean and orderly, and the neighbors were getting along fine with them, and the city swept it anyway. Even one of the guys from, say, Seattle, who constantly objected to encampments, thought that was wrong. That, here were people who were working well with their neighbors. And so the city really needs to respect that and encourage it, help it, help neighbors do that. And when it builds on itself, when Tent City 3 first started, the city did not help us. The city chased Tent City 3 all over the place, from church to church, organization to neighborhood to neighborhood, and it was great because it was great for development of public support of Tent City, because every new neighborhood, there'd be fear and hysteria at first, but it would turn into, in a matter of months or even weeks, into friendship and support. I helped start a shelter, while I was still in shelter, when our shelter moved. And there was, you know, a lot of fear and hysteria. But 3 months afterwards, I was visiting my friends, and I overheard on the bus one of the men who had most adamantly opposed that shelter bragging to a friend of his about the shelter that his neighborhood supported. And so that happens. Every time a church would be met by neighborhood fear and hysteria and stand firm and open up the shelter, the fear and hysteria died away. People became friendly. And every time a church would, it happened rarely, but sometimes a church would back up and say, we'll try again when people aren't so afraid. And the fear never went away. So one thing that the city can do is to stand firm like the churches that stood firm. Don't let neighborhood fear and hysteria and false information and stereotypes discourage them from opening a shelter in a place wherever there is a church or organization willing to work with them. And the other is don't if you can't provide a place for people to go, leave them alone. Yeah.
When it comes to the agencies in Seattle, the bottom line is they're incompetent. They really are. You know, my experience dealing with the Seattle City Council, dealing with HSD is they just don't know what they're doing. They've allowed for monopolization of tiny house villages, for instance, here in Seattle. And that's something that, you know, is unacceptable. They time again and again, they display that incompetence by the decisions they make. You know, deciding to shut down an encampment during the winter. You know, who does that? You know, so if anything needs to be changed, it's that. It's that, you know, Human Service Department do not have people that understand homelessness. They just don't. They don't get it. So, you know, that's the first thing that needs to change is that we need to have people in these agencies that understand it, that are forward thinking, and are willing to move forward with this. Instead, they're just allowing the same thing to happen time and time again, maybe a different village, but it's always the same outcome. So that's what really needs to change, you know, as far as what the agencies should do for the homeless.
So I was reading that you know, the city council kind of took away funding from some of these urban rest stops because their mission wasn't to house people, you know, and you know, the city of Seattle doesn't really come close to meeting the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, which is 1 toilet for 20 people. Right now, I think there's 6 for 4,000. So that's, you know, there should be 200 places for people to relieve themselves, wash themselves. Just, you know, the dignity of being clean can really change people's, just mental health and ability to keep a job. So I think, you know, the city really needs to support these 24/7 places where people can wash their clothes and do things that you can't in tech encampments. So, yeah, just wanted to spread that.
So I guess my point is, optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. So understandably and justifiably, I think the city's earned their ire, but I'm a big fan of corporate responsibility as well, right? And if you look at the decisions being made, they're being made with this in mind, right? In particular in Seattle. And folks who don't have the investment, because they're from other areas, primarily, who are moving into Seattle and don't have the investment in Seattle and the folks and the communities that are disrupting, and the cultures they're disrupting. I think corporate responsibility is going to be a big key in what happens here in Seattle and the region, not just the local governments. I was talking to my friends that do some work with the city of Renton about their budget, without divulging what that is around homelessness. It's really small. So it's really important for a city like Renton that Boeing's involved, that Kaiser's involved, right? That all those businesses in Renton understand that the local government's not going to fix this thing. The increasing power of Amazon, or Zillow, they're almost like our government to some degree. They're the powerful entity that we need to really be responding to and asking them to step up and have an active interest in what's going on. We see shelters being closed down. We see limited funding in our neighboring cities and counties. You know, so that's going to be really, really important going forward, and make sure that's part of the conversation.
I just wanted to add, when you use that word power, there's a man named Jared Diamond. Have you read his book Collapse, on how societies, choose to survive or not survive? One of the key things he identified, one of the key reasons why societies collapse, is when the people with the power to make decisions do not experience the consequences of those decisions. And that's what we've got. And so that's one of the things that has changed. Nobody would be competing to get the contract to run a tiny house village if homeless people had not proven that the model worked. If homeless people couldn't successfully run a tiny house village themselves, nobody would be talking about tiny house villages now. The only reason they're a popular idea is because homeless people proved that the model worked. Therefore, the homeless people who proved the model worked should be the ones being financed and contracted with the courage to do more of it, right?
I think.
You'd think.
It's not that case.
Nobody thinking. Okay.
I'm just going to do one more question before we move on to audience questions, and Bill's going to come and pick up your post-it notes. Or
Yeah, we might, if we might just make some room for audience to ask questions.
Yeah.
We don't have a huge pile at the moment.
Okay.
We might just keep going with fire questions, we have some backup questions. And then if-
I see some notes that are waiting to be asked, so we're just going to go around and raise your hand. But first, final question for y'all. We'd just like to know what a house citizen, and particularly those of us in the audience in Seattle, can do to facilitate housing those without homes.
How's it what?
Housing those without homes.
Well, I don't agree with the idea that asking corporations is going to get them to change their behavior, because profit corporations are designed to create profit, and the problem is they're creating too much profit for themselves and sucking it out of poor people. That's what's going on here in the city, and I think we have to insist that corporations, through laws like Amazon taxes and head taxes, do their fair share. And that means forming a political movement to do it. That's what people can do, and obviously we need rent control. Obviously we need rent control. It doesn't affect the upkeep of housing. And we've seen that a lack of rent control, we've managed to prove through not having rent control in the city that rent control is the reason for the loss of affordable housing, because we've lost it without rent control. So that's not the problem. So we need rent control. We need to tax big business. And we need to insist that, like Bruce is saying, that the people in charge are rational and have some respect for human dignity, instead of pretending all this nonsense that they're pretending now.
For me, there's so many organizations out there that have a need for volunteer, many different ways. Habitat for Humanity, block projects, which I like to volunteer for because I get to swing a hammer. But when these encampments need to move, when they need different supplies, there's we have a whole list of places that you can volunteer with. So if it's just plugging into something that's already in place, I think that's a really easy way to start, and working and getting to know the people that you're trying to help is just as important. So.
I'll piggyback off that last piece. I think it's really hard to advocate for a community when you view them as a monolith. And if you get to meet individuals and hear their stories and their priorities, then you're going to be able to advocate for those interests much more effectively. That said, I'm not doing the best job of that myself. I work in the affordable housing world, but don't spend a lot of time working with people experiencing homelessness directly. So that's a goal of mine in this year. And my grandmother recently gave up an affordable housing apartment in Tacoma shortly after they implemented a no smoking policy. And her housing alternative is currently a hostel in Mexico that gives you an idea that some of our own preconceptions about how to serve communities of people in low-income housing or at risk of falling into homelessness, they don't work for everybody. And without meeting these individuals and learning more about their values and what will benefit them, you can do a lot more harm than good unintentionally.
Yeah. Yes.
So at our village, we survive basically on donations. We don't get assistance. We don't. You'd be maybe surprised to know that we do pay a $90 copay. So many of the residents there work. They're getting their lives back together, and that's what we do to help pay for the utilities, the sewer, the garbage, and things like that. So, but unfortunately, as far as we're going to have to move here in a couple of months, that's on us. We have to figure out how to move it, where to move it, how to get the utilities in, how to get the sewer in. That's all on us. We're not getting help from anybody. We're going to do it. We're determined to do it, and we will, some way, somehow. But that's the challenges that we have, for this whole process.
And Nicholsville has a Facebook page, right?
Yeah, I've got pieces of paper here. You can
Good. There are pieces of paper, and so you can go to their page to find out what they're currently needing. And the Nicholsvilles and the tent city, well, I know about the tent cities. I'm not sure about Nicholsville, but I know that the tent cities welcome visitors. That's a great way to get to know real-life homeless people directly. And the website, sharewheel.org, has a whole page about the tent cities' current location and current needs. So that's one way to help out with immediate survival needs. Wheel has both a low barrier staff shelter that we run ourselves, and that gets a lot of community support from the First Hill neighborhood. And we do a homeless remembrance project, which includes women in black vigils whenever somebody homeless dies outside or by violence in King County. A Tree of Life sculpture and gathering place in Victor Steinberg Park, and 328 bronze leaves of remembrance in 17 different locations. Now, the Homeless Remembrance Project Committee can use volunteer help too. And that's, it's not like you're feeding somebody, but it is giving people dignity and making a very strong statement to the public that is having an effect, that without shelter, people die. We also have little pieces of paper in the back there by the wine and beer.
So this issue is so widespread that no matter where you live at, you can really put your foot in and make a difference. All right, so we have, on Friday morning at 2 a.m., 10 of our staff at Wellspring Family Services are participating in what's called the Point in Time Count. So this is a count that many of you have heard of that happens annually. It doesn't accurately represent the numbers of homeless individuals in the area, but it's a count that makes a difference, right? Ironically, on Martin Luther King Day, one of my favorite days of the year, we had a family resource exchange event. Wellspring Family Services, Mary's Place, Starbucks is a corporate sponsor there, and United Way. And we had 1,200 individuals attached to families come to this event for resources. Those events have over 300 volunteers each time. They're an amazing way to volunteer. Asa, my colleague in the back, Wellspring, she's fantastic at detailing opportunities. Our building's in Columbia City, but we actually do operate not just in King County, but now into Pierce County as well, with a bunch of different opportunities. And think about everything you take for granted, from basic needs to community support to love. We're not afraid to use that word, right?
That's a good word.
So we want to operationalize love. It's a key ingredient in communities and stability that we don't talk about. So that's the type of ambition we want to build towards. And the type of opportunities that we provide, you can apply those things. Love, sensibility, community building, and whatever your technical expertise is. Right? I mean, we have some fantastic innovators, I'm sure, here in the audience that that your brains are really important to this, right? Because to my friend's point here, I mean, HSD kind of thing, they're not very innovative or ambitious, right? And we need the common citizen who has technical skills to take those skills and put them towards agencies that are trying to make a difference, right? And let you know that you can be a part of strategic planning, right? Or a technological solution, right? So whatever it is that you feel like it's your talent, you can apply it. And start in your neighborhood. Start right where you're at. You can make a difference.
Thank you all so much for sharing those opportunities and all your experiences with us. Let's move on to audience questions. So if you'll just raise your hand if you have anything you'd like to ask. Yes?
So my question is, it seems like lack of empathy is really like the heart of the problem here. Like people aren't seeing other people as people. Mm-hmm. So like what would you suggest as like solutions for changing people's minds around homelessness and around housing rights as like a basic fundamental right for people everywhere?
Okay, she's gonna fire me up with that question.
Oh, yeah. Go
We need a campaign of care, right? There is compassion fatigue that's happening, that people are just stepping over people in the streets, right? So we need a campaign, just like we did around cigarettes and tobacco and things that, we need a campaign that is orchestrated, that everyone's involved in, that said, we're gonna change this issue in this area. And that could be the model for the entire country. That's how ambitious we need to be right now, this area. So a campaign of care. Right?
Personally, I think one of the problems is that people don't know what to do. And that they feel helpless. They feel like there's nothing that they can do. And human beings really don't like seeing other human beings in pain. It hurts us. So if you see somebody in pain and you don't think there's anything you can do about it, you try to make that go away. You either turn away, either don't see it, or explain why it's there. That person deserves to be in pain. Yeah, that's a drug addict there. You know, if he's in enough pain, maybe he'll quit drugging. So giving people something practical that they can do is one of the big reasons. And also immediate contact, you know, actually knowing somebody, working with somebody. I love setting up situations where you're working alongside, housed and homeless people are working alongside each other. That's a big way of breaking through that shell. And community meals, you have homeless and housed people sitting down and breaking bread together. All of those things help break through the challenge, but the biggest one is giving somebody something to do about it. And all of a sudden, you know, it's safe to care.
Yeah, you know, I was one of those persons that have experienced those stares that you get, the lack of empathy. You know, I lived under a bridge. I went to sleep at night, didn't know if I was going to wake up. I have no problem telling you that I was a drug addict. I'll forever be a drug addict. but I just don't use now. And I owe that to a tiny house village. You know, that saved my life, you know. So, you know, to make somebody empathetic, or, you know, to have some empathy for that, people just have to have an open mind, you know. They have to realize that we're people too, you know. I was very successful. I married 2 houses, and then a divorce and a market crash, and I hurt myself. I'm that classic type of person that, you know, then became addicted to opiates, and opiates became too expensive, so I got heroin, and that was it. And then I'm living under a bridge, don't know if I'm gonna wake up the next night. So, and now I'm sitting here. So for me, I've come a long way, you know. And it all started with Nicholsville. I owe Nicholsville my life, I really do. They gave me a little house with a little door with a lock on it. And all of a sudden, I didn't have to worry about, you know, if I was gonna make it through the night, you know. And for me, you know, back to one of the very original questions, you know, permanent housing can come in very different forms. And what you've got to realize is that for a lot of homeless people, permanent housing isn't a house by itself, but it's a community. And that's what these transitional, you know, I don't even like to call them transitional. To me, where I live at Tiny House Village, it's my home. It's my home. And, you know, I work, and I take care of my obligations there. You know, I have requirements that I have to keep in order to stay there. So, you know, I've regained the values that I've lost, you know, and, you know, I'm relearning the skills, and it just takes time. So, that's all I got to say about that.
I think one of the best ways to build empathy is to get in contact with others that are unlike you. In order to put yourself in their shoes, you have to be closer to them and understand what their shoes look like and all of that. And unfortunately, the way our society's taking shape, there's a lot of values and judgment and the federal housing policy that we've created for ourselves, local housing policies, local land use policies that segregate people and keep them from getting to know each other and continue to reinforce that same dynamic and the same cycles that we're living with today. So until we recognize that some fundamental aspects of the way we govern ourselves and the way we've set up all of these policies isn't just, and begin to challenge that and undo it as necessary, it's going to make it difficult to empathize with others.
If you haven't already, check out Facing Homelessness, Just Say Hello campaign. It just talks about breaking down those barriers and, you know, instead of looking away, look at what we created and accept it. And if you see it enough and stop looking away and want to do something about it, and obviously since you're here, you do. So when you find something to do, bring a friend or two with you and try to convince them as well. I think, yeah, will you make time to be the Good Samaritan is the question. And, you know, Facing Homelessness does a good job of just through portraiture photos of capturing people's humanity and looking past what may have caused them to become homeless and seeing what can blossom if you say hello, if you reach out and stop that social isolation.
So I don't want to criticize what I spend every day doing, which is working in the community to build up things like Tiny House Villages. That's what I do. So I don't want to criticize that particularly, but you know, I mean, I don't think the problem's lack of empathy. You know, I don't think the problem's lack of empathy. It's not knowing how to solve the largest structural problems, and there's no way to learn about it by watching television or reading the local paper. That's hopeless. You can't figure out anything. That's just confusing. You know, that's just confusing. So, I mean, there's one. I don't think the problem's lack of empathy. It's what do you do? And well, rent control. You know, you got to do rent control. You got to get more money into affordable housing by forcing corporations, not asking them forcing them to put money into affordable housing. Sweeps. You know, it's like, well, how much empathy do you have to realize that it's crazy to sweep people and just wipe out their place. And it's going up in Seattle. 810 months this year, or 760 or whatever. Last year, 12 months, it was only 600, and a decade ago, it was like 40. We're just sweeping people, moving them from place to place. How much empathy do you have to know that's wrong? It's terrible. And we have a mayor who's upping it and upping it and upping it. There's no way you could vote for a person like that. It's just like Trump. Not many people here are going to vote for Trump, right? Well, why are you voting for a mayor who does callous and cruel things just as much? You know, it's not lack of empathy. It's figuring out we got to change some things on a larger level. So.
He gets like that sometimes.
Any other questions? Yes.
Actually, I just want to tail off on that. There's a lot more to it too, though. You know, and part of it is the insistence on your part when you're talking to other people that are housed, on listening to the people who are homeless, not in the context or the lens of pity, but in the lens that that person is an expert in their story. That person is an expert in their needs. And understanding that through that lens will give you a better view of what we experience and how we go about things in a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it took a lot of work on my part.
Lived experiences.
Yeah.
There's nothing more important than hearing from the people who are experiencing the issue that you want to solve. And I was at a gathering a few months ago, and there were several people who experienced homelessness in different ways and different lifestyles. And the one takeaway, well, many takeaways, but the thing I've never forgotten from that session is that someone on that panel said, nothing about us happens without us, meaning that we need to be at the table, we need to be planning. If you've never experienced homelessness, if you don't know anyone who's homeless, who are we to be designing the solutions for people who have gone through that? And to the woman here in the burgundy coat who was talking about empathy, you know, you might be surprised to know that someone you work with is homeless. Many of the people that we serve at Wellspring are working poor. They are working jobs, they are going to work, but they may not have a place to lay their head every night. And so I think we need to remove stereotypes and demystify who's homeless and why, and then figure out, hear from them, what do they need to get ahead? And that's what Walter and his team do so well in our housing. They are aware of the changing demographics of who's being left out of the conversation, about meeting people where they're at. We don't expect everyone we serve to come to our building at 1900 Rainier. We're going to go to you, bring our services to you, and call every partner we know to make sure you're getting everything you need to help you on that journey to not only achieving stability, but maintaining stability. So,
I'd also like to ask, does everybody here have no problems at all making your rent? You never get behind on any bills, never get anxious over finances at all. The same economic forces that push some people out under the bridge are affecting every single one of us. Every single one of you. You're not up here helping those poor people down here. We all got to work together to change a system that's screwing us all over. Okay? Okay.
There's a great chance that everyone in this room knows somebody who works in the sector or supports human services. And what you probably don't know is how difficult it is to run a nonprofit helping people. I mean, I've hired literally hundreds of individuals who themselves are on the verge of homelessness. And it's a really unhealthy sector, and we have to do something to help those who are helping others as well, right? I mean, we're not unionized. We're just not a teachers union. There's a teachers union, it's not like a homelessness union of sorts. But it's really important that you know that it's really difficult work. It's difficult to help others. And know where it's at right now is that every year, dozens and dozens of nonprofits are going under. Some are doing fantastic work, right? So make sure that, you know, we hug the sector and those who are doing work in a different type of way going forward too. That could be volunteering, could be opening a pocketbook, could be attending a luncheon, things of that sort. So I just want to call that out.
I actually want to give a shout out to Traction. The NCC today voted unanimously to accept their offer for help for designing a new tiny house village and doing stuff like that. So we'll be getting in touch with you real soon again.
Any final questions? Yeah.
Thank you all for being here today. Some of the area communities do a fair amount of local advocacy with the city council and with the mayor, and it sounds like these non-institutional grassroots community organizations are really effective, based on what you're telling me tonight and other information that I have. What are some advocacy points, like yes, rent control, yes, we need to up our tax income from corporations. These are very pressing needs. But for your specific organizations, I know it's a little complicated with the way the Lehigh and the mayor.
Sean or Bruce can tell you where they came from today.
Yeah.
Where did you come from? What did you talk about?
Today we were at the city council talking, today we were at the city council speaking for them to accept the ordinance to have 40 more tiny house villages. So, it takes getting in front of the city council, and the more, what I spoke about was their responsibility to listen to public testimony, and that they should take due diligence in what we say, because their decisions affect us all. And last year they didn't do that. Last year was a very frustrating year. And it didn't matter how factual we were, how honest we were, they just didn't listen. And I have my opinions of why they didn't listen, but they did, they just didn't listen. And so the more people we can have coming out to speak to the city council, if we just keep hammering them every time, every chance we get, sooner or later they're going to listen. Sooner or later they're going to get it, and they're going to do something right. Don't hold your breath, but it will happen. It will happen. But we just need more people, day in and day out, letting their voice be heard.
So I guess my question
And it does really make a difference. It really makes a difference.
What's your question?
When it isn't just up
What's your
to-
question?
Yeah.
If we're gonna go and stand in front of city council and ask for these changes to be made, what should we say? What should be the bullets that we?
Yes,
that we
the
can-
tiny house villages.
Yes to tiny house villages. Yes to self-managed tiny house villages.
Don't contract with just one agency.
Stop,
Contract with the people who have the most experience.
stop the monopolization of tiny house villages, because that's what's happening right now with Lehigh. Lehigh is swallowing up every small 501c. They're just sucking them right up, and they're taking over. And the city council is listening to Lehigh. HSD is in a disgraceful partnership with Lehigh. They're in their back pocket. And you would be horrified at some of the stories, how there's been grievances that haven't been answered or dismissed or just put away into the filing cabinet. Residents' rights have been violated, rights to privacy. Their case management is so unprofessional, unethical. I could spend a whole night just talking about that. I've experienced a lot of it. Many of us have. And nobody seems to care. And that's what's so disheartening is to stand there before the city council, tell the truth. I've been called a drug dealer. I've been called a bully, a dictator. I've been called everything under the book. Stories have been made up about me. I've been told that I've been hostile and would hurt my fellow residents. All these stories made up by Lehigh. And for what purpose? Was to just discredit Nicholsville. I just recently received an email by somebody who decided to report to everybody, I'm sure got the email, about my criminal history. That happened 9 years ago. I emailed him back and shut him up, never heard from him again. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're always battling. And the funny thing is he picked on me and somebody else, and the other guy he picked on wasn't even that guy. He just had the same name, but totally everything else was different. And he was so sure of himself that he is going to expose Nicholsville for what they were. And I answered every point he had and told him what a fool he was, and that was the end of that. So that's the things that we are constantly battling. Talking about what can happen to tiny house villages is really going to start with the city council finally realizing that there's more than just one model of tiny house village. Lehigh is about staff. Being a staffed village, people are treated like sheep, they're herded like sheep, and then they just pluck them and move them on to permanent housing. They don't learn the skills that we learn. Lehigh is not doing a service to anybody by coddling them along. They're just not doing anybody any good that way. I have a saying like, I like to learn from my own mistakes. And that's what Nicholsville lets me do. Nicholsville lets me make mistakes. But what I do is I learn from them. And then I move on and I don't do them again. Most of the time. Sometimes. But the point is that we all make mistakes in life. And if you take away the ability to learn from those, you're not going to get any better. So
what I'm hearing is maybe a direct contract and keeping your independence is really important to keeping the communities going.
Absolutely.
And the longer leases sound like a positive move.
Oh yes.
Not only that, there is also a movement simultaneously on ending winter evictions.
Yes.
So that's also important to speak out on, because I came from that. I'm from that community that was facing eviction in December. And if we hadn't spoken up, if we hadn't stood our ground, we would not be in our tiny houses through this last snowstorm.
So the city council hearing on winter evictions is tomorrow night, 5:30.
That's a call?
Yeah.
So I was actually going to say just that. One of my two things is that eviction prevention is a really, really big deal. So we have a contract with Home Base to work with. We are providing eviction prevention right in the King County Courthouse. So in 9 months, we prevented 425 evictions, not individuals, but households, which is a really, really big deal. All those individuals who fell into homelessness, the complicated system that is, and have a difficult time getting out of it. So certainly pushing eviction prevention would be a big deal. The other thing that's a focus of ours at Wellspring is the definition of homelessness, right? And we use the McKinney-Vento definition primarily, but then we go upstream to stability. But if you don't have your address, if you don't have an address, you deserve services, right? I used to be a program manager at a client services office down the street, where 2,500 individuals get their mail sent every month, right? All those individuals deserve assistance no matter where they're staying. Whether it's in a hotel, whether it's in a car, right? Whether it's, no matter what it is, that definition needs to be broad-based and needs to be adopted by all agencies, whether it's the city, whether it's King County, whether it's a United Way talk about there. We want to say yes to as many people as possible. This broad-based definition of homelessness.
I was just going to add, I don't consider myself homeless. I don't anymore. I live in a community of people with people that we look out for each other. We make our own decisions. I don't consider myself homeless anymore. And just because I live in an 8x12, we have a community kitchen, we have toilets, believe it or not, that actually flush. We have a shower, it's like we have a big house that we all have our own separate rooms in. We're all roommates, living together. And, I think that's part of the problem is that people are so quick to move us from that to a permanent housing. Being a drug addict, you put me in a big empty house by myself with nothing to do, what do you think I'm going to do? Versus if I'm living in a community where I have support from my neighbors and from the people that live very close to me, it's going to help me more than it's going to harm me. So that's the other thing you've got to really think about is sometimes the solution for permanent housing isn't putting somebody in a permanent house. That's not what it's all about. It's about building these communities where we can grow together, where we can really feel that we're part of the overall general community. And right now, I spoke earlier, we have those 500 signatures from a neighborhood that were very fearful of us when we first got there. They had no clue what was going to happen. 500 signatures is a lot of people to sign saying they support a tiny house village. And we know them. We know them by name. They stop by every day. They come pet our pets, or they bring their pets over, and we give them water, and we hang out. And you know, New Year's Day, we had neighbors come over, and they threw us a little party, and we had these little wish things that went up to the air and almost caught the place on fire. We're self-managed. We didn't burn down. Lehigh would never let you do that. You know, so you know, it's a community of people, and you know, that's really what tiny house villages need to be about. With that, everything else will find its way. You know, people will begin to heal, and you know, that's what it's all about.
I want to be aware of everyone's time, so we're going to wrap this up. But I encourage you to continue this conversation one-on-one amongst yourself and with our panelists. And thank you all so much. This was a really amazing conversation. It's great to get all your perspectives.
One last shout out. In 2005, AIA had a design contest for the homeless remembrance idea. We really appreciated that. Thank you.
Designing tiny houses, I've got a slew of different designs. I was a general contractor for 35 years, and you all kinds of great ideas for tiny house concepts. So just throwing that out there. And that's what you'll find out if you come to visit these villages. You'll run into homeless people that are talented, that have skills, that have knowledge, that really can help steer you in the direction that you want to go. You know, so we are your greatest resources when it comes to doing stuff like this. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.